Didn't you admit to Dr. Cusimano that you were feeling depressed?
There's a reason he still shows up. In memes, in quotes, in clips passed around socials. A man in a robe, standing in his backyard, staring at ducks as if they might fly away with everything he can't admit.
I find I have to be the sad clown.
Decades later, we're still watching him try to breathe.
I've heard you describe yourself this way.
Because without asking to, Tony Soprano became a symbol for the modern man.
Laughing on the outside, crying on the inside.
Not the one we dream of becoming.
What are you so afraid's going to happen?
The one we quietly recognize.
I don't know.
On the surface, he's the Don, the husband, the father. But underneath is only a boy with panic attacks, carrying grief he doesn't know how to express.
Hey shit, I don't feel nothing. Nothing.
We weren't meant to see ourselves in him, but we do.
All this shit's for nothing. And if all this shit's for nothing, why do I gotta think about it?
Because Tony Soprano isn't just a character, he's a mirror, and what we see in that mirror depends on how honest we're willing to be. Nathaniel Hawthorne once wrote, "No man for any considerable period can wear one face to himself and another to the multitude without finally getting bewildered as to which may be true." That line, quoted inside The Sopranos, hangs like a shadow over Tony. And it's the same line that seems to explain why he's followed us into the digital age. When I released my first edit of Tony, a 7-minute meditation of clips and music, the response caught me off guard. The comments weren't analysis, they felt closer to confessions. People, men in particular, admitting, almost with relief, that they saw themselves in him. That his inner state felt like theirs, that the images of Tony alone were less a scene from TV than a reflection of their own lives. It made me realize the internet has become a kind of confessional booth, an anonymous place you can place your thoughts because no one is looking back at you. And here is where I think Hawthorne's warning resurfaces. When worth is measured only in motion, stillness can feel like death. A feeling and I think many can relate to. Carl Jung once said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And what struck me reading those comments was how many men seem to use Tony as a middleman for that acceptance. This weird irony of feeling a lot like him in many ways, mentally tormented and constantly questioning everything. Alain de Botton, a writer and philosopher I admire deeply, in his book The Consolations of Philosophy, suggests that culture at its best provides us with mirrors for our inner states, symbols that allow us to recognize ourselves without shame. Tony has become one of those mirrors, not because he's aspirational, but because he seems to give shape to feelings most of us do not know how to name. And Nietzsche, as always, cuts the deepest. He once said that every profound spirit needs a mask. The social markers we use every day translate to online, into avatars, reels, curated selves. But in the shadow of Tony, for a moment, the mask seems to slip. Not in therapy, but in a comment thread. And that is why I believe he still resonates. Why 25 years later, his face is still spliced into TikToks, stitched into Instagram reels, reposted by strangers who never watched HBO on Sunday nights. Tony has become a vessel. A man who embodies the bewilderment of wearing too many faces for too long.
It's good to be in something from the ground floor. I came too late for that. I know. But lately I'm getting the feeling that I came in at the end. The best is over.
Tony Soprano says this in the pilot, and the line lands with a weight that never leaves the series. But it isn't just Tony's lament. It feels like the opening prayer of a whole generation. Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote that life swings like a pendulum backward and forward between pain and boredom. pain when we lack, boredom when we acquire. Tony embodies that pendulum. He builds the suburban palace, runs the strip club, commands the men. But the more he acquires, the less it seems to satisfy. He flips between panic attacks and numb afternoons, pain and boredom, never landing in peace. Schopenhauer argued that chasing satisfaction is a trick of the will. Desire never ends. It only replaces itself. Tony lives that truth. Ducks in the pool give him purpose one moment, then vanish, leaving emptiness. His family gathers for dinner, then shatters into silence. The dream America sold him tastes hollow the moment he bites down. Camus, known famously for the myth of Sisyphus, describes the absurd as the clash between our longing for meaning and the silence of the universe. Tony feels that silence every time he sits across from Melfi. One scene distills it perfectly. Tony rants about America's promise, quote, "You know we're the only country in the world where the pursuit of happiness is guaranteed in writing. Can you believe that? A bunch of fucking spoiled brats. Where's my happiness then?" Melfi replies gently, "It's the pursuit that's guaranteed." Tony exhales. "Yeah, always a fucking loophole, right?" That loophole. That's the absurd. The promise always just out of reach. Tony refuses. He names the hole. He points at the absence. And in doing so, he brushes against Camus' conclusion. If life is absurd, the choice isn't to escape, but to confront it, to live without appeal. Tony never quite gets there, but his rage at the loophole is the rage of Sisyphus watching his boulder roll back down the hill. If Tony is the man who names the emptiness, Don Draper of Mad Men is the one who sells the illusion that it isn't there. Mad Men, like The Sopranos, was a show that had a lasting impact on me. The world of the show is packaged longing and about monetizing nostalgia. Don spins pain into slogans, trauma into taglines. He takes the ache people feel and sells it back to them as comfort. But like Tony, Don is hollowed out by the very dream he sells. Two men at opposite ends of the same lie. Tony consumes the dream and grows sick. Don manufactures it and grows empty. Both arrive at the same void. When people see Draper staring into his glass or Tony collapsing at the sight of ducks, they don't see mob bosses or ad men. They see themselves educated, employed, scrolling through endless content and feeling less alive than ever. Then there's Russ Kohler in True Detective. Played by Matthew McConaughey, he voices what Tony can't. For me, in his most memorable monologue, Russ says that time is a flat circle. Everything we've ever done or will do, we're going to do over and over and over again. Where Schopenhauer saw the pendulum, Russ sees the circle. Tony, drowning in déjà vu, senses both. Every dinner ends the same. Every power struggle repeats, every therapy session circles back. The futility is overwhelming, but where Rust intellectualizes it, Tony simply suffers it. Rust takes the logic of nihilism to its extreme, suggesting humanity itself is a tragic mistake. Tony never gets that abstract, but his panic attacks, his burst of violence, his blank stares, they're all his body saying what his mouth cannot. The dream is finished, the circle spins, nothing satisfies. So why do these words and characters, Schopenhauer, Camus, Don Draper, Rust, feel alive again today? Because the feeling Tony describes, "I came in at the end," is not just his, it's ours. Many people look around and feel the best is over before they even began. Wages stagnate, housing is out of reach, politics is theatre, the future feels almost used up, and the digital age accelerates the sensation. Everything new already feels old. Again, here, Alain de Botton sharpens the picture. In his book Status Anxiety, he argues that much of modern suffering doesn't spring from raw misfortune, but from comparison. The sense that others are living the life we were promised. Tony, on paper, has it all, yet it never feels enough. This isn't a unique phenomenon, but his despair is comparative, not absolute. He believes he should be happier than he is, and that gap between expectation and reality becomes its own pain. Tony Soprano isn't admired because he found answers. He didn't. He numbed himself with violence, food, affairs, distractions. But what makes him endure is that he articulated the suspicion most men carry but rarely voice. Maybe we did miss it, that maybe the best is already over, that happiness was never guaranteed, only its pursuit. And in naming that suspicion, Tony becomes not a hero, more so a prophet of disillusionment. His despair ends up being our reflection. Which is why his line from the pilot became the anchor for my first edit. I came in at the end, the best is over. It wasn't just Tony's beginning, it was ours.
Do you feel like Frankenstein? A thing? Lacking humanity? Lacking human feelings?
That's Melfi, looking at Tony across the room. The words hang there and produces one of my favorite shots in the show. A slow zoom into Tony's face as the audio of Meadows' choir performance plays in the background. Melfi isn't asking if he's a monster. She's asking if he feels hollow, if he suspects that whatever animates him isn't quite human anymore. And Tony knows the answer. Mary Shelley's creature was stitched together from corpses and jolted into life, a parody of a man, not born but assembled, not raised but constructed. And that's how Tony feels in flashes. Not a father, not a boss, not even a patient. Just a collection of functions stitched together by expectation, provide, protect, command, and when all else fails, consume. Like Frankenstein's creature, Tony wanders in search of recognition, yet every mirror reflects back something unlovable, unsalvageable. That's why Melfi's question cuts, because she doesn't see the Don, she sees the man hollowed out underneath. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." The Stoics believed that man's salvation lies in governing his perceptions, disciplining his mind against chaos. But what if you can't even access your own emotions? What if the inner storm is nameless? Melfi calls this alexithymia in the show, the condition where stillness is unbearable, where the silence between actions feels like suffocation, and that's Tony's life. If he stops moving, the thoughts swarm, so he keeps feeding the mask, business, violence, affairs, food, anything to keep the noise at bay. You hear echoes of this same fracture in another fictional man, one animated instead of human, BoJack Horseman. There's a monologue known as Free Churro, where BoJack stands at his mother's funeral and admits he never learned what it meant to be truly loved.
My mom died and all I got was this free churro. You know the shittiest thing about all of this? Is when that stranger behind the counter gave me that free churro, that small act of kindness showed more compassion than my mother gave me her entire goddamn life.
He spins jokes, cynicism, rage, all in an attempt to cover the one wound that defines him. Tony carries the same wound. His relationship with his mother, Livia, is the axis of his despair. At one point, after discovering she tried to have him killed, he breaks to Carmela. "What kind of person can I be if my own mother wants me dead?" That is Frankenstein's cry, to be stitched together without love at the origin. BoJack buries it under irony. Tony buries it under rage. Both are orphans of a living parent. Both search for a maternal blessing that will never come. And in that absence, both grow convinced they are not men at all, but things. There's another beat in the same session that I think produces one of the most illuminating exchanges in the show. Tony admits to envying the Hasids he does business with, not their money, their belief.
These Hasids, I mean, they're out there, but they got their beliefs, you know. They're not afraid of death.
Maybe they have the belief because they are afraid.
Ernest Beck, in his book The Denial of Death, writes, "The irony of man's condition is that the deepest need is to be free of the anxiety of death and annihilation. But it is life itself which awakens it, and so we must shrink from being fully alive." Tony lives this irony. His very vitality, his appetites, his hungers, his ambition is what keeps death close at hand. He envies those with belief because their rituals shield them from the full force of that terror. He has nothing but appetite, and appetite is no shield at all. What makes this scene endure is that Tony isn't raging or eating or commanding. He's sitting quietly in therapy and admitting the unnameable, that he suspects he's just a thing, that without belief, without inner order, without the ability to even name his own feelings.
You envy the Hasids and their beliefs?
All this shit's for nothing. And if all this shit's for nothing, why do I gotta think about it?
That's the mystery, isn't it? The mystery of God, or whatever you want to call it. Of why we're given the questionable gift of knowing that we're gonna die.
He is nothing more than motion, a shark circling, a Frankenstein searching for humanity he may never touch. And that's why I think this specific session between Melfi and Tony remains one of the most poignant exchanges between the two. For the first time, Tony opens up in a way that reveals one of his many inner fears.
Anthony?
You don't understand.
Make me understand.
The words hang there, and for once the performance drops. This isn't Tony the boss, or Tony the provider. This is Tony the father, admitting in a voice just above a whisper that AJ's panic attacks are his fault, that whatever is broken in him has seeped down into his son.
He's got that putrid, rotten fucking Soprano gene. How are we gonna save this kid?
This is the mirror moment, the unbearable glimpse where a father sees his reflection in the eyes of his child, and the reflection looks like a curse. Tony has always feared something nameless inside him. Violence, depression, silence, a rot he can't name, only numb. And when AJ collapses into panic, Tony sees it confirmed. The wound has passed down. The shield he thought he was providing, food, protection, suburban comforts, becomes the very source of the boy's suffocation. It's the Frankenstein logic again. When you can't give love, you give functions, and functions don't heal. So Tony sits in Melfi's chair not as a don, but as a father begging for exoneration from the one crime you can never beat, transmitting your own pain forward. This is the mirror moment. The child collapses under the same invisible weight the father has carried for years, and the father realizes he's not a shield, he's the source. Tony sees AJ break, and the line is unmissable. The same weakness lives in me. He blames himself, not just for AJ's panic, but for planting inside him a worldview of futility, anger, and silence. Now cut to another father, another world. Jax Teller of Sons of Anarchy. Like Mad Men, a show that left an everlasting impact on me, and a character arc that feels appropriate for this moment. Jax would sometimes stand behind glass, watching his sons on the other side, sometimes in a hospital corridor, sometimes through a screen door, sometimes from the edge of a playground, as if distance itself could apologize for his life. Both men are trapped in the same prayer: let what's in me stop with me. Only one of them finds a way to answer it. Tony's relationship with his mother is both heartbreaking and corrosive. A son confronted with the knowledge that the one person meant to love him without condition never loved him at all. Olivia Soprano is one of the great monsters of television, but what makes her terrifying isn't just cruelty, it's indifference. She withholds not only warmth, but recognition.
Don't you love me?
Freud argued that our earliest attachments sketch the template by which we measure all love that follows. When those attachments are poisoned, every later relationship becomes haunted, and that is Tony's curse. No matter how much affection Carmela offers, no matter how much loyalty his crew provides, no matter how much therapy promises, the lesson he learns is simple. Love is conditional, if it exists at all. Jack's inheritance is different, but it rhymes. His father left him a manuscript and a map out of the outlaw life. The club, his other family, made sure that map stayed folded. Violence raised him, loyalty taught him to keep it breathing. He keeps telling himself he can steer it somewhere cleaner. He can't. Not without breaking it, and breaking himself.
I realized, as I think you did, a good father and a good outlaw can't settle inside the same man. I'm sorry, JT. It's too late for me. It's not too late for my boys. I promise they will never know this life of chaos.
Where Tony sees a curse in the blood, Jack sees it in the patch. One father believes the damage is already inside his son. The other believes the damage is waiting for his son at the gate. This is the cruelty of inheritance. We do not choose which parts of ourselves replicate. The parts we most despise often sprout the fastest. Ernest Becker once wrote, "The idea of death, The fear of it haunts the human animal like nothing else. It is a mainspring of human activity, designed largely to avoid the fatality of death, to overcome it by denying in some way that it is the final destiny for man. Men don't have language for this, not the men Tony and Jax were trained to be. Tony's tragedy is silence. He cannot articulate what suffocates him, so AJ inherits not understanding but confusion. He sees his father's panic without context. He feels the tremors, but never the explanation. Jax's tragedy is decision. He speaks through action, burning bridges, cutting ties, ending himself as the last message. His sons inherit absence dressed as sacrifice. Tony's instinct is to hide the inheritance. Jax's is to cut it. One father leaves too many words unspoken. The other leaves no presence at all. Both reveal the same terror. That fatherhood is less about shaping destiny than about transmitting damage. And this is why their stories pierce beyond fiction. Because every son becomes, at some point, the mirror of his father. And every father fears the wound he cannot hide. There's a moment where Tony admits flatly that nothing touches him anymore. Success surrounds him. He leans forward in therapy and mutters, "What's the point? You go to Italy, you lift some weights, you watch a movie, it's all a series of distractions until you die." That line isn't just depressive self-talk, it's a philosophy of life stripped bare. This hollowness is not Tony's alone. Christopher, his surrogate son, gives it voice in his own cracked way.
I don't want to just survive. It says in these movie writing books that every character has an arc. You understand? Like everybody starts out somewheres, and they do something, or something gets done to them, changes their life. That's called their arc. Where's my arc?
What Chris grasps in words, Tony grasps in silence. The recognition that his life feels like plot without narrative. The sense that nothing adds up, that life refuses to resolve into meaning. Don Draper in Mad Men gives the same despair and eloquence Tony never could. In one of his most haunting letters, he writes,
"When a man walks into a room, he brings his whole life with him. If you listen, he'll tell you how he got there, how he forgot where he was going, and then he woke up. If you listen, he'll tell you about the time he thought he was an angel, or dreamt of being perfect. And then he'll smile with wisdom, content that he realized the world isn't perfect. We're flawed because we want so much more. We're ruined because we get these things and wish for what we had."
Alain de Botton again frames this modern despair. He says, "Our culture has taught us that satisfaction is a perpetual possibility, that happiness is purchasable, attainable, even a duty. And yet, when it fails to arrive, or evaporates instantly when it does, we are left not only with emptiness, but with the humiliation of feeling uniquely cursed." Tony embodies that humiliation. He has the spoils, and still he stares into the void. And that's why Tony's struggle echoes beyond his own chair. Because it isn't only about him. When he says life is just distractions until death, it resonates like a confession we weren't meant to hear. And so Tony becomes not just a mob boss in decline, but a mirror for anyone scrolling in the middle of the night. He embodies the truth that distraction is not deliverance, and that silence when it finally arrives is unbearable.
Sometimes we go around feeling pity for ourselves. But behind our back, a great wind is carrying us.
Tony recalls this line after his coma, left by his sister. It serves not as a revelation, but as a fragment, something half remembered, half believed. Yet it carries a weight that feels older than him, older than the show. A reminder that behind our complaints and our miseries, there may be something unseen, some current that moves us even when we think we are still. But Tony cannot hold it. He brings it up only to let it drift away. because to accept the possibility of being carried would mean surrendering the one defense he has left: self-pity. And without self-pity, what remains? In one session with Melfi, he breaks.
Seriously, we're both adults here, right? After all is said and done, after all the complaining and the crying and all the fucking bullshit, is this all there is?
The sense that even survival, even power, even confession doesn't lead anywhere beyond itself. Schopenhauer once wrote, "Human life must be some kind of mistake." The truth of this will be sufficiently obvious if we only remember that man is a compound of needs which are difficult to satisfy, that their satisfaction achieves nothing but a painless condition in which he is given over to boredom. Tony is that mistake made flesh. He has all the satisfactions that others imagine would complete them, he has already acquired. And yet he sits in the chair calling himself
like fucking King Midas in reverse here. Everything I touch turns to shit. I'm not a husband to my wife. I'm not a father to my kids. I'm not a friend to my friends. I'm nothing.
When John Schwinn tells him nothing is separate, everything is connected, Tony looks unconvinced. Schwinn uses the metaphor of tornadoes, two violent currents stirred up in different directions but really the same wind. It should be comforting. The idea that we're not alone in our suffering, that we are part of a shared fabric, that the great wind carries us together. This is where Albert Camus offers a language Tony himself cannot. In The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus wrote, "In a universe suddenly divested of illusions and lights, man feels an alien, a stranger. His exile is without remedy since he is deprived of the memory of a lost home or the hope of a promised land." Tony lives in that exile. He cannot believe in the Hasid's faith, cannot surrender to Schwinn's mystery. The futility isn't just abstract. It lands hardest in the moments with his children.
When they're little and they get sick, you'd give anything in the world to trade places with them so they don't have to suffer. And then they think you're the cause of it.
That's Tony's real torment, not just that life feels empty, but that the emptiness may be his fault. That his son's panic attacks are the inheritance of his own disorder, that the darkness in him has passed down, father to child, like a curse stitched into the bloodline. In those moments, self-pity turns into something worse, the suspicion that his existence contaminates the ones he loves. And in the end, it all collapses into a single question he cannot stop asking. Is this all there is? That question, unanswered, is why I think Tony resonates so much as a character. He is the voice of so many, especially in the modern era, and why I chose that line for the title of my last edit. It's a resounding one because it's one and I'm sure many of you have asked yourself more than once. When Tony slips into his coma in season 6, he wakes not as himself, but as Kevin Finnerty. A salesman, a stranger, a man stripped of family, stripped of status, stripped even of name. The dream sequence unsettled many viewers at the time. It seemed too long, too slow, too surreal. But looked at again, it may be the single most important arc in the series. Because for the first time, Tony experiences the terror of being no one. Not boss, not father, not husband. Just a man in a hotel room waiting for something he can't name. Because for the first time, Tony faces the terror that has always stalked him, not death, but erasure. Camus once wrote in The Stranger, "I realized then that a man who had lived only one day could easily live for 100 years in prison. He would have enough memories to keep him from being bored." What he meant was that the bare fact of being alive, of accumulating impressions and sensations, can be enough to fill existence. But Tony, in the body of Kevin Finnerty, feels the opposite. He has lived decades, collected wealth, power, family, enemies, and yet they only mattered because Tony Soprano mattered. Without that name, the memories curdle into trivia. He becomes replaceable, interchangeable, no one. The coma dreams are threaded with imagery of crossing over. Tony is drawn toward the light, beckoned to hand over his briefcase and surrender his identity. There are voices telling him to let go, to walk into the house where his family waits. Sometimes I go about in pity for myself, and all the while, a great wind is carrying me across the sky. That old line returns here like a ghost, but Tony cannot accept it, not because he clings to life, but because he has no belief strong enough to carry him across. He once confessed to envying the Hasids he did business with, not their money, but their faith. Their sense that death was not the end, but a passage. Yet here, in the body of Kevin Finnerty, that bravado collapses. There is no something, no shield of theology, no narrative of redemption. Just the abyss, dressed up as a hotel lobby. So why does this matter to us now? Because Tony's fear is our own. In the digital world, identity is fragile. We live as fragments, usernames, avatars, curated roles we perform constantly. But when those roles are stripped away, the question Tony faced is the same one many ask in silence: who am I? If I am no one in particular. So in that way, Tony as Kevin Finnerty becomes a parable of that fragility. The fear that behind the performance, there is no self, just a man in a hotel room waiting. This is why the Finnerty Arc resonates online more than it did on first broadcast. Decades ago, it felt abstract. Today, it feels somewhat prophetic, because so many of us are uncertain of who we are apart from the roles we perform. In the end, Tony wakes. The name reattaches. The family gathers around his hospital bed, as if nothing has changed. But something has shifted. The glimpse of Kevin Finnerty lingers like an echo, a reminder of what he might become, or what he already is when the roles collapse. And that is why this arc is essential, because Tony's true fear was never prison or even death. It was erasure. The possibility that behind the mask of Tony Soprano, there is no one at all. And that's why the final scene remains so masterful. Tony looked up, the bell on the door ringing, then nothing. The screen goes dark, as if Tony himself is erased from the frame. Not death we witness, but disappearance. And as the black screen sits, I remind you of Bobby's line.
You probably don't even hear it when it happens, right?
When I first watched The Sopranos again in the winter of 2023, I didn't plan to make anything from it. I'd lie in bed at night, phone in hand, watching, screenshots piling up of moments that struck me. Tony with the ducks, Tony breaking in Melfi's chair, Tony staring blankly into nothing. They weren't edits yet, just fragments that seemed to hold a truth I couldn't yet define. Eventually, I tried to string them together. The result was my first Tony Soprano edit. It was supposed to just be an ode to the show, an editorial challenge on trying to summarize a character that complex in a short time frame. I thought of it as a small personal thing, and it started as such, but slowly, over months, the video picked up steam and then the comments came, slowly at first, then endlessly. People said they watched it daily. A lot said they cried. One therapist even wrote that it captured exactly how her or his patients sounded. That startled me, because what I had done almost instinctively, pulling images and sounds into sequence, had somehow mirrored what others felt but couldn't quite express. And I guess that's where this essay began, not as a deliberate plan, but as a response, an attempt to explain why those moments mattered, why they struck such a chord. In a way, it's me answering the audience of that first video, but also answering myself. Why did I pick those scenes, those quotes, that order? What was I trying to say without saying it? What I learned is that the quote I built this around, Hawthorne's warning about masks, is not just Tony's condition, it's ours. We wear it in all aspects of our lives, and like Tony, we risk bewilderment, forgetting which is true. And I suppose to definitively answer the thesis of why Tony became a father figure to the internet, I don't believe it's because he's strong or stoic, in the ways the modern social media apps try to portray through Instagram motivational frames or TikTok edits, but because he embodies the fracture. Because his silence, his numbness, his bewilderment looks too much like our own. So if the first video was instinct, this one is an attempt at articulation. If the first one made you feel something, this one is my attempt to explain it. And maybe, in doing so, it proves the very point I've circled all along. Tony is a mirror. He doesn't absolve us, but in watching him, we are forced to admit what we'd rather keep hidden. Hawthorne was right. Wear too many faces, and you forget which is true. If you made it this far, I sincerely appreciate you watching.
This was the first of, I hope, many video essays I put together going forward as I look to rework the content on the channel. Please let me know what you took away from it. And if you missed the first Tony piece that was the genesis for this one, you can click the button on your screen now to watch. Take care, and I will hopefully see you on the next one.